Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate you joining us from wherever it is you are in the world. My name is Teresa Welsh. I'm a senior reporter with Devex based here in Washington, D.C. I write about food systems and write our food systems newsletter, Devex Dish. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Representative Dwight Evans. I'm really excited to have this conversation with him about U.S. nutrition policy and food security policy and the important role that the US as a policy setter, as a funder, plays in nutrition and food policy around the globe. Thank you so much to CARE, which is our presenting partner for this event today and helping us make this important conversation happen. We'll be having a two-part event today. First, my conversation with Representative Evans, and then we will also be hearing directly from CARE's Chief of Party in Zimbabwe, Walter Moza, to hear a little bit more about how US funding plays out on the ground. So I am very pleased to welcome to the stage, the virtual stage, Representative Dwight Evans of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure to speak with you about this important issue. And I would love to start a little bit and hear about your sort of journey on this issue. You've been in Congress for several years now, and you guys have had quite the agenda over the past several years. Of course, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, so many domestic issues that take up your time. Tell us a little bit about why international food security and nutrition policy is an issue that you really have been paying attention to and has been important for your office.
There's probably nothing more essential than food. And the aspect of food and its connection internationally and what it means. I've been an advocate from the very beginning when I first came to the Congress in 2016 to talk about food policy is foreign policy. And it's been essential to understand the significance that food plays in terms of our foreign policy. And fortunately, also, I was appointed to the Agriculture Committee when I first came in 2016. And there were some people making noise about a urban congressman from the city of Philadelphia. Why would I want to be on the Ag Committee? And I knew, coming from Pennsylvania is a rural state, and foreign policy is extremely essential in terms of the promotion of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and then this link to the world. Then also, secondly, I hooked up with CARE. And in 2016, I went on a CARE tour to the country of Jordan in 2016. And then in 2019, I went to Bangladesh. So we're going on both of those tours. It just really enhanced my thought process around food policy as foreign policy and the importance of it. Also, what came is that happened to be the year of reauthorization of the Farm Bill. That when I came here, Farm Bill is done every 5 years. So I had the pleasure of being intimately involved in developing a lot of relationships with various members around the country about foreign policy. So the uniqueness that I see different than when I came in 2016, and here we are in 2021, is you have a different president, you have a different vice president, you have a different agriculture secretary, you have a new chair of the Agriculture Committee. So the players are all different than when I came in 2016 and here in 2021. But having all those players, I view, offers far more opportunity on the issues that we will be talking about over the next 25 minutes. And it's important to understand that through opportunity around food policy, that means there's chances to make more changes, that I believe. Because I've seen when I came in 2016, here we are in 2021. So things like the Farm Bill, nutritional funding, the Global Food Security Act. Those are all opportunities that I believe. The other aspect is at the time, and not that I think this is partisan, but that the House of Representatives is in Democratic control, the United States Senate. But I always have believed food policy is bipartisan. It is not partisan, because food is very essential in America, understanding this tool being used in a way to help and enhance the world. The other thing was there was not a pandemic when I was elected. Now you have a pandemic. You going almost 2 years dealing with this challenge. So I share with you my growth and development has been a lot since 2016.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like that's such a great introduction to, sort of the depth and breadth of this issue and, all the ways that you, as a member of the US Congress, have had the opportunity to interact, specifically with US food security policy. I'd love to talk a little bit more about a number of the points that you just raised. Tell us a little bit more about your involvement on the Agriculture Committee when you served on that committee. And for Devex has a lot of viewers outside of the US, so they might not be totally up to speed on all of our different congressional committees and what they do. So tell us a little bit more about the role of the Agriculture Committee in the US's ability to set food security policy and what role the Farm Bill specifically plays in that as well.
The Agriculture Committee is the committee in the House that sets the national food policy internationally, says a great deal shaping it, but also domestically. And I come from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is a very large state. And I mentioned that agriculture is very essential in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I mentioned to you, it's about 67 counties and rural. Most people talk about, they know about Pennsylvania. They mention Philadelphia, they mention Pittsburgh, but it's all in between there. That is very important asset and a very important element to the growth of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which in return, meaning that Pennsylvania can be a great trading partner with other places and food around the world. What connects to it is that, though I'm not still on the Agriculture Committee in terms of policy, I'm now on the Ways and Means Committee, and that deals with trade and trade. So I have gone from that aspect of agriculture now into the element of trade and what it means around the world. And food is, again, always essential in all the elements of the conversation I had. So it starts with the Ag Committee. A lot of people like to talk about the Appropriation Committee and ways, but Ag and food is, food to me is the most essential issue that we can play a part in terms of the world.
And how do you talk about these issues with your constituents in Pennsylvania? As you mentioned, you're obviously a representative from a city, so the people that you specifically represent might not be on farms and might not be farmers. But does the fact that Pennsylvania is an agrarian state, does have lots of farmers, does that help you connect these issues and the importance of them to your constituents? If you have people asking, hey, representative, why is this something you're working on?
That's a very good question you asked. I got the perfect answer for you right there. The former chairman used to ask the question to me, how many farmers do you have in your district? I used to say to him, that's the wrong question. You should ask me, how many consumers do I have in my district? Because it is the connection of the consumers and the producers. The consumers and the producers. It is that connection where you talk about urban and rural, and the importance of food, nutritional value, food security, the availability of food. I use an example. in the case of like supermarkets, the availability of supermarkets available for access of quality food, that is something big. But that is also a problem internationally, the availability of access to food. So what I say to them is, you know, you can talk about it in Philadelphia or you can talk about it in Africa. It's still the availability of food or anywhere you go around the world. So I share with you that is basically explaining to people. People do understand food. I mean, you know, they understand when you mention, because food is always in gatherings and holidays and celebrations, and that's not something to take lightly. That's something where I say, when I say food policy is foreign policy, where you can affect, because, you know, Senator Dole, go back to, was there, and the late George McGovern, in terms of the policy that they was able to put together in the Dole McGovern initiative. Those were tools in the toolbox to deal with nutrition, malnutrition, those type of things in communities and what we face all around the world. And the real question is the role that America can play as an active partner with World Food Wide organizations that I mentioned to you. When I first went overseas, it was with CARE. I mean, when I said Jordan and Bangladesh, 2 locations, but also what was very important is the importance of children and women as the centerpiece in terms of your strategy about addressing the issue around food insecurity and the need to address food insecurity. So that's how I basically talk to my constituents. I mean, they can relate to that. They can understand about the need of food policy, hunger, and what takes place. And that issue, again, transcends political parties. I mean, I don't, you know, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, when it all comes down to it, having the access and affordability of food is very essential.
Yeah, I love that you, brought in that emotional piece of food policy. And that's actually a lot of what draws me to this issue as well, is food is a part of our everyday lives. And you're so right. You know, how do you convince people this is something they should care about? You know, how many of the people in your district eat food? Well, that's all of them. So everyone should be focusing on this issue. And, you know, it is so central to our lives. And I think, you know, as you mentioned, it's been a traditionally bipartisan issue, and, you know, y'all up there on the Hill have had a lot of contentious days over the last 5 years. There have been a lot of arguments over all sorts of things. But tell us a little bit about what it means to have this issue, and, you know, among other foreign policy issues, have traditionally been more bipartisan, and why it is so important to, you know, maintain support from both parties for strong U.S. leadership when it comes to food security.
I don't think there's, and I'm a little biased. I don't think there's any other issue than food, which is as bipartisan as it is. It really is. And there's not the barriers or the walls up when you're talking about the subject, because most people, whoever, can relate to the issue of food. The only question is, do people have access and availability to it? Now, obviously, this pandemic, which is worldwide, has had huge effects upon impeding people access to food for various reasons. Certainly, America sits in a unique position in terms of there's our farmers, there's the need of our consumers and others in finding out strategies that we can address the various issues. And like I said, this is my 5th year being here. I cannot think of any other issue which has not been as partisan as that. See, I think we need to be more of a champion. Look, I think that the Secretary of Agriculture that you have is different than the one who's his predecessor. But I think that you have someone who's been around, who's been there. The chairman of the Agriculture Committee in the House is a gentleman from Georgia. So he has a real lot of knowledge and understanding. He's been on that Ag Committee. I know him very well. I know him well. I know the Secretary of Agriculture. That combination of some nuclear. And I think when you have a president which is talking about America stating very clearly that it has a role and a responsibility to interact with the various partners we have around the world, I think that that's something different. And then the Secretary of State. So Secretary of State, Secretary of Agriculture, the chairman of the Ag Committee. I'm only speaking about the House, so I can't speak too much about the Senate, but I do know that the senator from my state, Robert Casey, at one time, he's not on there now, he was on the Ag Committee. So we used to do things together. So I think that the whole thing is that 2023, in my view, or 2022, are opportunities. All of these are opportunities that I'm discussing with you, but it requires a coordinated, focused strategy. And the focus strategy should be as food as the basis of the strategy. That's what I believe. I one time said to Madeleine Albright was sort of an event where I said that the food policy is foreign policy. And that was a brand new congressman. She was like sort of impressed that I had said that to her, because I think that the tool of food policy is very much essential in working the strategy. And I learned that with going on the CARE trip when we went to Jordan and went to Bangladesh, specifically around policy, and with children and women as the center of the development of your policy, I think is very important. So I think if I would say to you, like the late John Lewis would say to me when I had the pleasure of sitting with him on Ways and Means, he would always say, if you don't think things have changed, just walk in my shoes. So I'm sharing with you from 2016, and here we are in 2021, that I can say to you as we head into the Farm Bill reauthorization, that there's opportunity to take advantage of and build on what we've laid out. Now, you had a Republican administration for 4 years. Now you have a Democratic administration, and I don't believe there's necessarily like any real contention about addressing these issues.
And what would you like to see in terms of building on the policy that's already been set out? Is that more funding in total, more funding for specific countries or regions, more targeted funding? Tell us about sort of your vision for expanded U.S. leadership on food security.
Well, I think obviously funding is an issue that we need to build on. Very similar to when the president talks about building back better. I think building on what he's talked about from a domestic standpoint to an international standpoint, we need to build on what's been there. CARE just had its 75th anniversary of CARE and the philosophy of it and what it means. I think that we should be keeping building on the partnerships and organizations that America has. Because they exist, they work. We just, part of going on the CARES tour in Jordan and the Bangladesh was to see what works, to look at what works and build on that. And I think that, you look at it, you evaluate what's the better approaches. And I think that, as I said to you, I've been here since 2016, this is 2021. Those were kind of my learning curves for me and to enhance my thought process. But one thing I know that is very essential is food policy more than ever, in terms of the nature of the world, the challenges that we have. But it's something that we can state from the president. He talks about the leadership that America can provide. Well, I hope to be a part of providing that kind of leadership that is very essential with dealing with malnutrition. It's something you can't take lightly. We're talking about children and opportunities that people have. And, pandemics, fortunately, only come around once every 100 years. And it's not something that, we should take lightly, but leadership is very key. And a part of the leadership is having food policy be in that toolbox in addressing the challenges that we have. So as I said to you, we got an opportunity, right? Nutritional funding, farm bill, global, all these things are right here in front of us. And, it's a lot different when I started, which wasn't that long ago. And plus, I'm far more prepared, in thinking about this and giving some thoughts to some of the questions you just asked.
Tell us a little bit more about what it was like to go on those trips to Jordan and Bangladesh. I think sitting in Washington, I'm based here in Washington as well. And even as a journalist, sometimes you're focusing on issues in kind of an abstract way. You're maybe writing about it, reading about it, but going out into the field, seeing the world, seeing the work on the ground is a whole separate sort of experience. Emotionally, what was that like for you to sort of have those moments realizing, oh, wow, this is what US leadership on this issue actually does. This is what US funding does on the ground in these countries.
Well, the first thing I would say to you, I think that we were welcome in our visits. And the fact that we were there and they could see a member from Congress who actually was there is one thing, as you said, to sit in Washington is another thing to actually be there on site, in refugee camps, and to talk to the people on the ground and the importance that they feel that America was providing, the fact that we were there. We are aware and being conscious and not being like absentee supporters, but trying to do it in partnerships. So I learned anything that, though I had never been to Jordan or Bangladesh before, enhanced, because in America, for various constituencies, they were impressed with the fact that I personally was there. And I said to you, it helped being on the agriculture committee, and then in return, talking about the aspect of food security from a domestic standpoint and connecting that to an international standpoint. That was the connection that I was able to bring. As I said, I represent Philadelphia, a major city, and then here I was connecting between the domestic and the international, which are very much the same. As I said to you, farmers that I talked to, I go to the farm show in Pennsylvania, and the idea about, farmers are looking for markets and opportunities and where things are. So I was able to link those kind of things. But now with that aspect, now I'm being on the ways and means with trade, which is also connecting all of these type of things together. But being focused on the part with the underlying aspect about food policy. That's the underlying aspect in all my thinking since I've been here in Congress about that. And you mentioned earlier something about I don't find, again, when I talk about food, I don't find that as partisan at all. I mean, I really do find people, of goodwill who really care from whatever side of the political spectrum they may be from. The essential aspect of food is really something that warms them because they think about their own experiences when you talked about, food brings all kinds of experiences in situations. And it's not something that I create. People just, wherever they may be, in Asia or in Africa or South America. I went on with the former chairman. I went to Argentina. I went to Brazil. We talking about soy. I went to those places. I went to Honduras. So, I mean, I did that with the agriculture chairman at that time because he asked me, I was on Ways and Means, he asked me to go on that. So between Jordan and Bangladesh and Argentina, Brazil, Basoi, and then all of those things have just helped enhance my view generally about food policy is foreign policy. It is to me the most fundamental issue that you lead into the question about peace and harmony in terms of the world. I think those are very essential elements as a place that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, sort of those broader issues that you see food policy connecting to. You just mentioned peace. What are some of the wider foreign policy issues that the world is struggling with right now that consistent, well-funded, well-targeted food aid policy, nutrition policy could help solve? How is that beneficial to the U.S. as a whole?
One of the issues is Philadelphia, through the Afghanistan refugees come back, has been one of the sites that is the receiving of a lot of refugees coming in. And the stability aspect around refugees. Then you could talk about Haiti and the challenges that are there because of global climate and political unrest, are opportunities to find ways to bring a sense of, it's interesting. I just went through Veterans Day. First time you could say America has not been in a hot war in the last couple of years. I mean, the last 20 years when you think about it. And it is that type of stability, which I believe where food policy comes in a great deal in terms of building the various countries with the aspect of growth of food, farmers and entrepreneurship. It's those things that I think are very important as a tool in the toolbox. So when you talk about the big picture, I'm saying there's opportunity here. I mean, we know global climate and the challenges we have there and how that's affecting the world and how we're taking care of our planet. So the question is, with food policy, what's going to happen for the future in terms of growth and where will this policy? So all these things, I think that these are things that I believe that the president understands and has in the right place. So all these things are interconnected. It's not like in isolation that we deal with it in a narrow way, but it is challenges that we face.
I'm so glad you mentioned the issue of climate. That, of course, is particularly topical this week as we just saw the international climate negotiations wrap in Glasgow over the weekend, COP26. There have been multiple calls from activists to link these two issues. We, of course, have been talking about food security policy, but linking that with climate policy. When you're thinking about U.S. policy, why is it important that the U.S. takes these two issues together and does not deal with them separately?
It's no way America cannot think those two things being linked because of the effect that it has upon people and having access to growth of food and how it affects farmers, which in return affects the economy. So there's no way that they cannot be linked. It's sort of like when I started this conversation, when I said foreign policy, food policy is foreign policy. I mean, what I said is linked. When you talk about my constituents, I talk about producers and consumers. They're linked. I try to say that in Pennsylvania. Like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, but fully foreign policy is very essential to what happens in Pennsylvania. It's not like just urban, like Philadelphia, it's rural Pennsylvania. Well, in terms of the world, it's the same way. So that's what you mean by with the challenges of one of the largest investments in the Build Back Better initiative that the president talks about is the way to address the whole climate issue. The fact that former Secretary of State, now the kind of his czar on climate issue, John Kerry. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that the president picked a senator from Massachusetts and a Secretary of State to be that person. That's that linkage that you talk about. And I think those things, I think you have to have intentional reality, intentional aspect to this. That's important to understand. So if you're talking about food policy, talking about climate, you cannot not be intentional in our approach of addressing this challenge. So the design of farm bills may have been different at one era, but there certainly, as we move towards the future, we'll be completely reassessing how we go about, doing farm bills, because farm bills come around every 5 years, and it's something that we'll be more. So I think that connection between Secretary Kerry, Secretary Vilsack, the new chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. David Scott, it's that kind of, I don't think you could think of this approach in isolation, any of it in isolation. I don't think you could think about one lane, don't think of the other lane. I think it's all interconnected.
That's something we talk a lot about in the development space, referring to them as silos frequently. And,
Yes.
people often have their particular policy area, their particular topic that they work in. And I think that is something that can be really challenging, is convincing people, if you're an ag person, you should also care about nutrition, or if you're an ag person, you should also care about health. That can be hard when people also are fighting for funding too. They want their programs to be funded. They think their work is the most important.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm on the subcommittee on health, on Ways and Means, and there's a hospital used to be in my district in the suburb, that the hospital has a greenhouse, and they use food as medicine, right? Because there's a movement of food as medicine, and food as a way to address the aspect of health. Okay, so food is medicine, food is foreign policy. So you see how we keep coming back to every element that you can think of is food. Usually if somebody's fortunate enough to go to the doctor, they'll be talking about, what is your diet like? What is it that you eat? And that's where you get into malnutrition. You talk about the aspect of food. That's why I saw one with the Jordan, one with the Bangladesh, is what about the available food to children? So food as medicine is another one of those elements that are so very important. All those things, when I traveled, going back to Bangladesh and Jordan, I saw in the field aspect where I said food is medicine. So a suburban hospital was using that as a greenhouse and talking about using that way. But here in the field, it was actually using food from a malnutrition standpoint and strategies around that. So when you ask the question of what I see, obviously like to see funding targeted towards those areas that can help. We can help with policy to make sure that countries that have a challenge with food, that we can be supportive and helpful to. I know that charitable organization, or there's this partnership. So again, to me, it needs to be, and I don't know what kind of title would be, if you would call it food czar, or someone that basically focus on the element of food. I mean, it's the issue that I feel, I'm on small business command Ways and Means, but interesting is I'm the biggest champion around the issue of food. And that's a policy I think is so essential.
Well, Representative Evans, I think that's a great way to end this conversation on that call to action, perhaps for the administration. If any of you are watching, Representative Evans wants a new position. He wants the food czar to take over taking care of these issues. It was such a pleasure chatting with you and hearing about your perspective and, you know, how you tie these global issues back home to your constituents and show them, you know, why they should care that the US is a leader on food security policy and nutrition policy. Thank you so much for joining our Devex audience today. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you also.
Now, I am so pleased to be joined by Walter Moza, who is the chief of party for CARE in Zimbabwe. And we are going to be talking a little bit more about how U.S. nutrition funding plays out on the ground. Walter, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Teresa. Glad to be here.
And so we just had the opportunity to hear about how the U.S. government, U.S. Congress specifically thinks about nutrition funding and why this is a priority for them. I'd like to hear from you a little bit about how you see this play out on the ground where you are in Zimbabwe. Tell us a little bit about the project that you're working on and why U.S. funding is so important to work like this.
Thank you. So I work for a project called Takunda, which in the local language means overcome. And this is a resilience food security activity that is funded by USAID DHA. The project is designed to address food security and nutrition challenges that face the rural communities in the southeast part of this country. And also we are looking at nutrition and disaster risk reduction activities. The reason why this is critical is we are working with communities that are faced by repeated shocks, have structural challenges that affect their ability to provide enough food for themselves, especially for children, for women and girls. So we see this as an opportunity to influence some of those systemic and structural issues that deny this young and future generation the opportunity to have a meaningful life and grow to their full potential.
And I think all of those issues that you just mentioned are, you know, frequently ones that we encounter on the ground in countries that are struggling with malnutrition. What would you say in Zimbabwe is sort of the chief concern that you're dealing with, and how is your program going about solving these issues?
Well, one of the big things we do globally as CARE is addressing the place of the woman, especially in providing for the family. So we're looking at kind of the cultural and social norms that affect the ability of women to earn, provide, and even be able to make decisions about what happens in the homestead. So as we address those approaches, we work with them as smallholder farmers, we work with them as making them as mothers, and mostly looking at how they influence the decisions on what food is consumed in the homestead, who gets it. Many times we see decisions where it's the men that get the better portions and the women and the girls get to eat last. And so we're looking at all this. But then there's also the whole climate change challenges that communities like this face. So as we wrap up the COP26, we'll also looking at what does it really mean for a smallholder farmer to adjust to these realities of climate change, drier seasons, low yield. And so we are supporting farmers to engage in technologies that improve their ability to produce sufficient food in that. And then lastly, we look at their income opportunities. So yes, agriculture is a big driver for incomes in this country, but as the populations grow and some places get drier, we are also seeing a focus on non-agricultural type income sources. And so we are also promoting those in the communities we are working in.
Such great points there. And I love that you mentioned CARE's focus specifically on women and girls. And I think that aspect of hidden hunger that we see with women and girls is something that we don't necessarily talk about enough. So you might do a hunger survey and have numbers to have a reasonable understanding of what hunger might look like in a particular community or on a national level in a particular country, but that can mask what's happening inside a household. As you mentioned, sometimes the men are not hungry, but the women are, and the girls might be because they're not eating as much. So I think that's such an excellent point. And of course, the tie into COP and the climate change connection, I just, is something that we cannot deny is happening any longer. And I've written recently about sort of how the food systems and wider agriculture nutrition agenda has not necessarily been front and center at COP, and how problematic that is. Lots of folks saying these two agendas really have to be linked. They have to be tied together for, success of the climate agenda. And, obviously lots of people have different ideas of what the outcomes ought to look like. But, the way that climate change is affecting farmers, as you mentioned, and just how general hunger levels are going to affect mobility and migration, and all of those things really are linked together. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on what you think policymakers need to understand about all of these issues. The people, whether it's US Congress or, the executive branch here in the US or in other nations as well that are donors, that, finance organizations like CARE that work on nutrition and agriculture programming. What do they need to understand about what you see every day to really be targeting their dollars in the most effective way possible?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would really like to highlight in my experience in not just Zimbabwe, but in previous contexts where I've worked, Ethiopia and Bangladesh most recently, is that oftentimes our programming tends to be very unisectoral. So we look at very specific, we look at a household and we say they just need water. And the reality is water is just one of the many things that a household needs. And as we think about how the architecture of funding, it's really critical that donors, especially and policymakers, look at a household as a group of people who have many, many needs or many, many different livelihood challenges they are pursuing each day. And whenever you put $1 to one intervention, it is actually split across all the needs of that individual household. And so the big thing that I'm putting out here is really trying to figure out how can we holistically program and engage with communities and households in ways that don't put them in small pots, education pot, hunger pot, a health pot. The household is going to put all what it gets, and the achievements then are either watered down or ineffective because you put percentage of your funding to develop one aspect of that. So I think that's a big one that I would really like, and it really is pushing for continued engagement at multi-sector level, putting in the health, the education, the water systems, all these actors together and looking at how we can support individuals and their homesteads and communities. Another big area that I would really look at is how we, especially in the global foreign aid policies, we've seen a lot of shift to really specific alignment to individual countries' foreign policy approaches. And so aid is being put across what I consider a deeper alignment from the donor's perspective, not so much from those who are receiving it. And so mostly those don't always align. So we're seeing funding being taken through specific areas that are of value to the donor or the sources without necessarily connecting with the realities or the most pressing needs of the recipient communities. And this will also mean even social values that are being attached to foreign funding, which makes it a little harder for us as we deliver the programs to engage in some of these issues that arise as we engage with communities and put through the programming.
Yeah, I really love the points you made there about multisectoral action in particular. And I think that's something that, as much as we love to talk about in development, has yet to be perfected. And, there's lots of talk about multisectoral action for nutrition programs in particular. And I think the recent UN Food Systems Summit made an effort to break down some of those silos. Forgive me for using that development phrase, but, bringing together folks from all of these different aspects that do touch on nutrition, touch on food, touch on agriculture, and bringing these people together and realizing that, helping them realize that they have a common agenda. I think that can be hard. You mentioned the education bucket. If you're an education person, how do you get your mindset sort of beyond just, kids in classrooms and learning and what are all of the interconnected things. I know CARE in particular does a lot of its nutrition programs through schools actually, and uses that sort of as a medium to, get kids better food, to help educate them about how to eat better, help educate their families about how to eat better, and bringing all of those things together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the most revealing things for me is when I leave my office in a city and go to the community and engage with what's going on with the aid. So just want to appreciate people like Representative Evans that will get out and see what we do out in communities, because only then can they better look at how that works for us. So something that just want to comment and really appreciate those who get out as they give the money to see what it means for the communities they serve.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point. And that's something that CARE obviously works on, is helping people see, what these dollars are actually doing in the field. I think it can be a pretty abstract thing sometimes for, folks in Congress that are looking at budgets and pages of numbers and, understanding, okay, what's actually the impact of what we're spending. And I actually also had the opportunity to be on a CARE learning tour. So I've been in the field with CARE with some staff from Congress. And so I've, gotten to witness sort of how CARE goes about trying to make those connections and helping folks understand, what's actually happening in the field. And I do think it's quite powerful. I mean, for me as a journalist, it's quite powerful to be out and to be seeing programming and to understand what's actually happening and what, difference it's making in people's lives. And also, what could be done better? What does funding need to be directed better towards, and also, what needs to be done better on the programming side? There's always room for improvement, I think, from everybody in this system. But yeah, I think it's really powerful when folks have the opportunity to actually get out there. Well, Walter, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really great having the opportunity to speak with you. I really loved hearing about what you are working on and also your advice for our policymakers. Anything else you want to add before we sign off here that you want our policymakers to know?
Well, I'd just like to, again, let everyone know that there's a lot that's going on because of the work that they have done, especially during the difficult COVID times. We've seen women step up and provide solutions to communities, and whether it is supporting hungry families or being the first people to produce masks when we couldn't, when they were not available at prices that are affordable to many of them. So through village saving loans and associations that we support, we saw them just step up, and that was really empowering for all of us. So your money, your work is making a big difference, and we hope to continue with these partnerships. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Walter. I really appreciate it. Thank you to our audience for tuning in today. And thanks, of course, to CARE, our presenting partner for this Newsmaker event. I also welcome our audience to subscribe to Devex Dish. Again, you can find that on our Devex website if you want to be kept up to date with all of our food systems, nutrition, and agriculture coverage. Thank you for joining us today.